Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video I'm going to be going over all the mini set cards and I'm going to be trying to boost some of the underpowered ones and take down the power of maybe the mage ones. The mini set was a bit of a dud, some uninspired cards, so hopefully we can change that around in this video and make some of them a bit more viable. So these are the changes I do, starting with Death Knight. Alright, Eternal Layover, we're changing that from 4 mana to 3 mana. I toyed with making this 2 mana because the effect itself is kind of similar to Equality. And it has actually some downsides in some ways. Like if you have a minion on board, the opponent has a minion, you play Equality, you could trade your minion. But with this card you actually can't, so you need something else in addition to it to actually kill. There is obviously the upside that this works with your death rattles, it gives you corpses, that sort of thing, which helps the DK. But I ultimately made it 3 mana because I don't think I want to have DK have access to an Equality effect when they have access to Molten Magma from Shaman. So I think 3 mana is a good spot for this. I don't know if it's going to suddenly make the card great, but that's what I decided on. Next we've got Soul Searching. Now this card isn't bad on paper, but it's just being held back by its rune restriction. 2 green runes, it really can't be played in too many decks right now. I only really play DK. Making it 1 Unholy instead means that we can play it in Rainbow DK, and you can do it with the 10 mana spell and get extra copies of that, which is a big dream that I want players to have access to, and doing this change will do that. I also thought that the corpse requirement of 5 was a little bit too much, and lowering it down to 3, I think it's a bit more fair. Next, we have Travel Security. Now, this card was really overcosted at 6. We've had similar effects in the past from like Shaman. They had a 5 mana 2/2 that summoned a taunt that wasn't particularly great. That received some buffs into viability. This one coming in at a 6. I've looked at the data on the card and it's absolutely awful right now. If you make it 5, you can make maybe a deck built around it with the Death Rattle synergies, but currently at 6 it's too much. Make it 5, I don't think it's going to be too broken, but it might be a bit more fun to play around with. Alright, that's the DK changes. Next up we have Demon Hunter. I have played some big Demon Hunter with the Spirit Peddler, trying to make that work to varying degrees of success. It's almost there, but I think it needs a little bit more of a boost. And the main one I'm thinking about is making it a 5 mana 6/5 instead of a 6 mana 6/6. Still reducing the cost by 6. If that's too strong, maybe you could reduce the cost by 5. The reason I like this at 5 mana instead, obviously it's easier to play, but it curves really well with Rush the Stage. Play Rush the Stage on 3, and then follow up with a discounted one for 4 mana, and it just smooths out the curve a lot better. Another change outside of the mini set would be to change the Umpire's Grasp down to 3 mana again. Maybe change it a little bit so it's got 2 attack or something instead, just so it's not too broken. But we're looking at only mini set changes in this video, so this is the change I did to Spirit Peddler. It'll make it a lot better that way. I decided not to change the Demonic Deal. I think this card you could put it as deal 5 damage to a minion, but I think we're just like power creeping removal a little bit too much then. I don't think it would break the game at deal 5. Right now it's a decent discover option from various Demon Hunter cards you can get it from. You can put it in your deck to use some Umpire's Grasp synergies, but I think deal 4 is a good level for it. While not broken, not very strong even, I think putting it to 5 sets a precedent that I don't really want to dip my toes into. Next we've got Infernal Stapler. Now this is one of the more drastic changes I thought of doing. It's not too bad a card right now in some aggro decks. Some decks are running. It's not like strong particularly in them, but it's alright in them. This change I want to make it a 2 mana 3/2 instead. This will just help the curve a lot better. I also lowered the amount of damage you take just to make it a bit better that way. It allows you to have synergy with the new Priest card, the 3 mana 4/3 that summons a copy itself. You have the really nice curve of playing the Stapler onto into that. And it just activates all the self-damage stuff a little bit better, I think, and would probably make a more interesting card. Okay, next up we have Druid. I thought about changing Number Cruncher to a 2/2 as its base form. You'd end up with like 8/2, 6/4, 4/6, 2/8. I don't think that would break standard particularly. It might end up being a pretty decent card for some decks, maybe Highlander decks. But I ultimately decided not to change this just for the sake of the Arena Bros. I think a 4/6 with Rush and Taunt before an Arena it would be probably a little too much. This is kind of like a pack fillery card. It's not particularly exciting. It's not one we're like desperate to buff into viability. So leaving it as is, I think is fine, even though it's probably not going to see any play. Next, we got Handle with Bear. One of my favorite flavors of the set. Unfortunately, they made it really weak. 2 mana, it adds 2 3/3 bears for 3 into your hand. They gain +1/+1 each time they're in there. I think if you just make the bears 2 mana, it's absolutely fine. If you compare it to Patchwork Pals in Hunter, we get 3 animal companions, and each of them are 2 mana. And the effects of them are arguably a bit stronger. Obviously, Misha is pretty identical if you let the bears cook for a turn. But if you're top decking this later, they're still going to be the base form, for one thing. And you only get 2 of them, and you don't have access to the charge from the Huffer or the board buff from the Leox. So I would say making this 2 mana for the bears is completely fine. It is a Druid, so there is some balance difference between that and the Hunter, but I think this would be absolutely fine at 2. And maybe it would be a viable option for some decks, maybe aggro decks, maybe Highlander decks too. And the last card, Ungoro Brochure, I wanted to change this. This is too weak as it is, but like the obvious change would be to make it 3 mana and maybe change the +2/+2 to +1/+1. But then you also got to change the flip side to 3 mana, and we can't really change the numbers on that one too much. So I think that would be too strong as a 3 mana +1/+1 / -1/-1 on the spells. So we kind of got to leave this card as is. I think there's not really too many other ways to change it. So just for the sake of balance, we got to leave it like this. All right, next up we have Hunter. Hunter's cards aren't too bad, honestly. They are seeing a bit of play. None of them are like crazy good, but not a crazy bad. I mean, the monkey business is kind of bad. It's not strong enough really to build the deck around, but it's not too bad of a card. 8 bananas to 9 bananas is basically +1/+1 on the buff, which is quite a big deal. If you change like Blessing of Kings from 4/4 to 5/5, that sort of thing. And if you've got a full hand, you're going to be getting +8/+8, which is pretty powerful for 4 mana. I've thought about making it 10, but I think that's probably a bit too good. Next, we have Workhorse. This one, I'm making it a 4/3. The health on the card is just a bit too easy to deal with, I think, for just a stat drop. It is seeing some play and some experimentation in tokeny style Hunter decks, but it's actually kind of a bad card in every deck it's in. I think if you make it a 4/3, it's probably a strong option without breaking the bank. Talking about breaking the bank, we've got the Cash Cow. This is a surprise for people. Some people saw this card like before the Miniset. I was like, why is Hunter getting this card? It turns out it's actually a pretty good card for Highlander decks. You can play it in Highlander Priest, Highlander Shaman, and Highlander Hunter. And it's just a really good bridge tool for getting to your later turns where you can play your Reno, your big Ziliacs, that sort of thing. So I'm not going to do any changes to the Cash Cow. I think it's actually in a very good spot balance-wise right now. Next, it's the big offender. It's Mage. This is the one that's been crushing the mini set. Portal Mancer Skylar is the main offender. Now, this card is causing issues not just for the card itself, but the fact that you're a tourist into Rogue. It really boosts Surflopod. You can replay your spells once you've played them. But this card itself is also really broken. Like the mulligan win rate is in like the 70s in some cases. So this card itself does need a change. I thought about changing it from 5 to 6 mana to be a bit safer in terms of keeping big spell mage and viability, but it's such an unfun experience. I think changing it from 5 to 7, giving it a bit of stat boost just to be sure that it's still not broken is fine, because I think for the overall health of the game, the deck style is just not very fun. There are other issues, of course, because it's a very tricky card to balance, because a lot of its power comes the fact that it's a rogue tourist, and you can't really change that text of it. So 2 mana change, I think, will keep the card itself in line, and maybe the rest of the deck falls in place then. You could talk about other balance changes if necessary outside of that, like the Surflipod, but this video is just going to be focused on the mini-set cards only. Next we have Burn Down. There's no change to this. I think this is just a decent card as is. Sees some play in some spell-based druids, maybe some aggro druids as well. Not too much play in Mage itself, but I think it's in a good spot. Huddle Up, I think you also just leave it at 7 mana. You don't want to make it 6 mana. It's a bit probably too good then. Big Board Flood, not the most exceptional card at 7, but we don't really want to make it crazy good. Sometimes a good Discover off of the 2 mana Shadow Spell and Mage that casts a spell for you if you're on 9 mana. You can get this down for free. Otherwise, maybe kind of good in Treant Druid as is right now. I think that these 2 cards are in a good spot. Alright, next we have Paladin. Paladin, I think, suffered a little bit from not too creative of a mini set, so it's hard to do too many changes to these cards. Vacation Planning, I think, restoring the health up to 7 is a good change if you compare it to other cards in the game, like Seedling in Druid, which can potentially gain you 10 armor for 3 mana and draw you 2 cards. I think Restore 7 is fine. Also cards like Pendant of Earth, which restore health and draw you cards with less mana. I think we can be in a spot where Paladin have access to a bit more heal. This will help sort of the combo-y Lanessa decks, or maybe some Highlander Paladin decks. It's not really going to help the premier decks right now for Paladin, which is like the hand buff Paladin. It's still not a card you'd run that, but it will help some of the lesser played archetypes, I think, without being a broken card. Busybot is fine. You can't really change this card. It's like an okay card for maybe tokeny Paladins. I wouldn't do any changes to that. And Trustful, I also wouldn't change. Like, you could argue you want to make this 3 mana, but then it's like 3 mana, give yourself 2 big minions into your hand for fairly cheap. I think that just pushes it into maybe a little bit of toxic territory. I think this card is fine as something you wouldn't put in your deck, but it's kind of a fun one to randomly get off Yogg or the Scorpion in Rogue, for instance, and use it that way. And I think just leaving it as that kind of niche card that you sometimes generate is probably the way you want to do a card like this. Next we got Priest, Envoy of Prosperity. I'm making it 4/4 to 5/4. This is like the Bibliomite change. Arguably the text on this is worse than Bibliomite, and we're like a few years beyond Bibliomite in terms of power creep. So this change, I feel, is pretty safe. Next we have Silver Moon Brochure. +2/+2 is a little bit too weak of a buff. I think the standard really is +2/+3 for a 2 mana buff. We have that with Shaman, we have that with Druid. So this change feels pretty safe. Obviously, we changed the flips version as well to -3 health as well, so it's a bit better removal. Job Shadower, not going to do any changes for that. This one is going to benefit mainly for the Demon Hunters. If we do that change for the Stapler, it's going to curve really nicely into this. So this should be in a good spot with the other changes in mind. Next, we have Rogue. Sharp Shipment, no changes there. It does see a bit of play in some kind of toxic face weapon rogue decks, and it seems to be in a good spot for those sort of decks. Agency Espionage, 4 mana to 3 mana. It's a meme card, but it's a bit expensive even for a meme card. I think if you make it 3 mana, it's not going to suddenly be OP or anything. It might not even be good within the context of the meme decks. So this is a pretty safe change, I think. And finally, Robocall. I think this is one of the cooler cards of the set, but I think it needs a little boost, and the boost I would give it is that it randomizes when it enters the hand, so it doesn't start on 8, 8, and 8. Potentially will draw you 3 cards with a body for 3 mana, which sounds really powerful, but it's random what it'll do, so you have to kind of spread out your deck if you want to maximize this. If on average it's going to be a 3-2 that draws you 2 cards for 3 mana, I think that is fine for the context of Rogue, because Rogue just draws a lot of cards anyway. They have access to a lot of good card draw regardless, so having this compete with that other card draw is fine. Yeah. Next, Shaman. Hydration Totem is a little bit weak. You can make it a 0-4, I think, pretty safely. Not the most exciting card. I mean, Shaman in general is in a pretty great spot. There's so many viable archetypes, so we're not really pushing the boat out here with any of these changes. Ice Crown Brochure is a card that is fine as is, I think. I don't think you need to do any changes to that. Maybe it helps some of the Razzle Dazzler decks as is. Turbulus, I think, needs a little bit of a buff for himself. I've tried a lot of decks with Turbulus, and he is always really awful to draw. Changing it from 4 mana to 3-3 and giving it a little stat nerf, I think, is the way to go. And it won't feel so bad to actually play the card. Warlock. Now, Warlock, I really wanted to change some of these cards for Warlock, but I think Warlock suffered the most this set from just the actual card, the choices, basically, what they are going to print. And I haven't actually come up with any changes to these. And I'll tell you why. The Deadline, it's 2 mana, destroy a minion. It's got a cool effect that is temporary. You have to trade it to get into it. Sometimes good to draw if you've got a lot of card draw in your deck. I thought about making this 1 mana, but I think it was a bit too powerful if you compare it to like the Light It Burns. This is like a better Light It Burns in Warlock. So it really is kind of stuck at 2 mana, but it's kind of a cool design, even though it's not a viable card. Fine Print is just weird that this got printed. Warlock has had so many AoEs printed already. You have Domino Effect, Hellfire, Wing Welding, all these things. So adding another one is just like, it's not design space that Warlock really needs. So there's no point really trying to buff this one into viability. Just leave it as is and just move on. Employee of the Month, also no change. You could maybe make this a 1 mana 2-1 or something, or a 1 mana 2-2 if you really wanted to buff it, but I think it's just fine as is as a utility card. Again, Warlock just kind of suffered from a lack of maybe direction for this mini set, and it's not so much balance. Finally, we got Warrior. A few changes here. I'd change Alloy Advisor from 2-6 to a 2-7. It's a little weak, but it's not too bad. I think if you make it a 2-7, it's a pretty viable option for Highlander Warriors. And maybe some Hunter decks that dip their toes into Warrior could consider it as well. Reserve Spot, I think, is just... It really didn't need this. If it's only 1 there, reduce it by 2. I think you could remove the clause that it has to be the only minion in your hand. It might be a little bit too powerful with +4/+4, so I've decided to make it +3/3. That honestly might not be necessary either, but to be on the safe side, we've gone for that, and I think it would be a viable option for some decks in that case. The fact that you have to have only 1 minion in hand is just too much. I don't think you really lose the flavor of the card either if you remove this clause. Finally, Punch card, I've changed it from +3 attack to +4 attack. I think that's fine for removal. +4 to a couple of minions that you have to use your face on is pretty good for 3. And that's all the changes I'll do for the set. All the neutral cards I think are actually in a fine spot. See some play for each of them, and none of them I would actually buff. Hope you enjoyed the video, and let me know what you think of my changes and what changes you would do yourself. I'll see you in the next one.